what's up guys, welcome back to the channel. And on today's video, I have a good one for you because on today's video, we are looking at an update of a very long running franchise of Mizuno. Guys, this is the updated Wave Rider, the Wave Rider 29. Let's get into it. Before we get started, I just want to say that this video is in collaboration with my friends over at Roadrunner Sports. Now, the Mizuno Wave Rider 29 was sent to me for the purpose of review. However, no one at Roadrunner Sports has told me what to say, they don't have any editorial privileges, and all the thoughts and opinions are my own. With that said, if you want to pick up a pair of the Mizuno Wave Rider 29, you can head on over to Roadrunner Sports and pick up a pair for $150. And of course, I will place a link in the show notes below in case you want to pick up a pair for yourself. Now, I already said that the Wave Rider, well, I didn't really have to say it because the Wave Rider 29 is the 29th iteration of the Wave Rider, which means it's been around a long time. So there are going to be a lot of people that are just mad for the Wave Rider. For good reason, it does a lot. But I think the Wave Rider 29 has made some big steps forward. And with that, we'll get started off with a stack height because the Wave Rider 29 now has 39 in the heel, 29 in the forefoot for a 10mm drop. And that is the first big change because up until now, the Wave Rider has been a 12mm drop. Now, even though a 10mm drop is still quite high, I think Mizuno made a good choice lowering it to 10mm. And I think it's going to open those doors to more people that may have been maybe scared away by the 12mm drop. And now with the 10mm drop, it's, I don't know, it's more in line with some of the competition. And for me, I don't really find myself very drop sensitive. I mean, I can tell the difference between a 0 drop and a 10mm drop shoe. The difference between 12 and 10 wasn't really noticeable, especially when I wore a pair of the Wave Rider 29 on one foot and another Wave Rider 28 on another foot. But we'll talk more about the differences in the ride when we talk about the ride in just a minute. Now, it's not just the drop that is different. Mizuno has actually added stack height to the Wave Rider 29. And in this version, we have an additional 1.5mm in the heel and an additional 4.5mm in the forefoot. So we've got quite a bit more cushioning under our foot, which is just going to lead to a more pleasant ride. But not because there's more foam, I think maybe because of the foam itself. But I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself already. But even though there's a little more foam, the weight has also gone down. In fact, Mizuno claims that in a US men's size 9, the Wave Rider 29 would tip the scale at 9.3 ounces or 263 grams. However, in my size, a US men's size 13, the Wave Rider 29 tips the scale at 11.5 ounces or 325 grams. And in my size, that is an 11 gram reduction over last year with the Wave Rider 28. Before we've even got too far into this review, I think we've got a pretty good update on our hands, especially if we consider more stack height and a lower weight. Okay, let's start at the top and work our way down. And before I start talking about this upper and everything in it, this is very similar to the Wave Rider 28. But you can see we've got a good amount of padding coming around this heel collar. Yeah, it's very padded. Wave Rider is always just a super comfortable shoe just to put your foot in. The heel counter is quite rigid. Nothing really has changed there. I think clearly Mizuno knows what works and they're not messing with the little things that make a Wave Rider a Wave Rider. So I did have a good heel lock and overall lockdown across my entire foot. The upper of the Wave Rider 29 is a jacquard mesh, and I found it breathable enough, but not any more breathable than I did last year. In fact, if we look at the Wave Rider 28, when I touch the upper of both shoes, yeah, they feel very similar to me. I mean, there is a slight difference as far as thickness goes and therefore breathability. I think they seem very similar. Now, as far as overlays go on the Wave Rider 29, there really aren't too many. We have the TPU running bird here on the lateral side and on the medial side, and then the top of that running bird kind of ties into the eyelet chain to provide a little bit of reinforcement coming along there. I think it's quite difficult to see on camera. The upper does have these little TPU nodules, but that's just part of the design, I think. I mean, it's probably giving a little bit of structure, but overall, I think that's just the design aesthetic. There is an underlay coming around the toe bumper just to give that upper a little bit of height off the toe box. And before we get too far away from the heel slip, if you did experience heel slip in the Wave Rider 29, there is that extra eyelet hole, so you could do the runner's knot if need be. Heel slip was never an issue for me, so I didn't have to use it. The tongue on the Wave Rider 29 is quite similar to the Wave Rider 28. It's actually fairly thin for a daily trainer, which, you know, I am a big fan of. I really am not a fan of when companies kind of overdo the tongue. They really make it stuffed and puffy, and it just kind of gets in the way. The tongue of the Wave Rider 29 is just, it hits that sweet spot. It's still padded enough to provide all the protection I need, but not so much that it gets in the way. Oh, the tongue is gusseted on both sides. There is no lace loop, but I don't think that's really necessary. The gussets kind of hold the tongue in place, and the tongue didn't move around on me at all. Just a quick note on the laces and that, well, they did their job, right? They didn't come untied when I tied them, which is really the only thing I want from a pair of laces. But just a quick observation, and that the laces seem quite long. Does this seem long to you on camera? it seems very long to me. And I always double knot my laces when I go for a run, and I still found that what I had left over was just a little long. Of course, it didn't affect my ride any. I don't actually remember feeling the laces slapping around on my foot, but it was noticeable. So if you are sensitive to lace length, that could be a consideration. The sock liner of the Wave Rider 29, it is removable. So if you did want to take that out and put in something custom, you could certainly do that. But now I want to come down to the midsole, because the midsole in most shoes has an oversized influence on how we think these shoes ride, how they feel. And in the Wave Rider 29, that is certainly the case, because Mizuno has upgraded their midsole foam to 100% Energy Next. Now let's just go back in time to the Wave Rider 28, and you remember that they also included Energy Next in the Wave Rider 28. But in fact, on the Wave Rider 28, the Energy Next was just this little bit of foam right here on the heel. The rest of the foam was Mizuno Energy. So in the Wave Rider 28, we had this little sliver right on the heel, and in the Wave Rider 29, the whole thing is Energy Next, which is an enormous upgrade. Now, Energy Next is a supercritical EVA. It is both lighter and more responsive than the regular Energy foam. Now, a lot of you may be thinking, Matt, it's Mizuno's Energy Next. Is it going to be so soft like the Neo Vista or the Neo Zen? No, it is not that soft. However, it is just a little softer than the Wave Rider 28. But I don't think it is so much softer that it's going to put off people that were fans of the Wave Rider 28. I think it's incrementally softer, but again, when I was running with one shoe on each foot, the 29 and the 28, it certainly was noticeable. And I've got to say that I did like the ride and the feel of the Wave Rider 29 better than the 28. But again, the difference wasn't night and day. In fact, if I'm totally honest, if I was to run in the shoes separately, so one pair and then stop and change both shoes and go out and run in another pair, I think the difference would be very hard to tell. But when I did have one on each foot, the difference was noticeable. Of course, the Wave Rider wouldn't be the Wave Rider without the wave plate, and we can see it just kind of peeking out here. It's red on my colorway, and that is just a TPU plate that runs from the back of the heel to the midfoot. And basically that's just going to support forward motion and make for a smooth transfer of weight. Now, Mizuno's designers, they know what they're doing. So in some of the Wave Riders over the past years, when the Wave Rider was quite a bit firmer than it is now, I always questioned like the point of the wave plate. However, I think the wave plate is a good addition to the Wave Rider 29, just because as these foams get even softer, we do need just a little support inside. So I think it's very beneficial in this case. Now with the wave plate, Mizuno has just made a few tweaks, and these probably aren't tweaks that anyone would notice if you bought one shoe one year and then the new one the next, unless you hold them up next to each other. And when I hold them up next to each other, it becomes apparent that the wave plate on the Wave Rider 29 just comes slightly more forward than on the Wave Rider 28. Also, the shape of the wave plate, it is not quite as wavy in the Wave Rider 29 as it was in the Wave Rider 28. Also, on the Wave Rider 28, we can see that the plate gets a little thicker here on the medial, and then again on the lateral side, it kind of flares up, and the plate on the Wave Rider 28 is basically just flat. And one last thing about the plate, if we look at the bottom of the shoe, we can see that Mizuno has closed in that channel on the bottom. On the Wave Rider 28, we can see it was an open channel where you could actually glimpse that plate on the inside. They have done away with that, and instead they've gone with just a smooth indentation just to let that foam expand. While we're looking at the bottom of the shoe, you can see we've got a good amount of outsole rubber coverage. They're using their X10 outsole rubber. It is very durable. It's a little thicker here on the lateral heel edge, which I am definitely a fan of because that's generally where I strike first. And I am seeing just a little bit of wear here on this lateral heel edge, but yeah, nothing to really write home about. The Wave Rider 29, like the 28, like the 27, like all Wave Riders, is definitely going to last above average. Now, one other slight observation that I have noticed when I take the Wave Rider 28 and the 29 and hold them kind of next to each other. Now, this is in no way any kind of scientific measurement, but if I just hold them up, it looks to me that the heel on the Wave Rider 29 is just slightly wider. And I mean slightly, maybe 2 millimeters wider than that on the Wave Rider 28. The heel bevel still looks to be about the same. And then when I come up to the forefoot, even though the forefoot is apparently the same width on the 29 and the 28, the midsole on the Wave Rider 28 is just a little more bulbous. So there's a little more sole flare on the 28 than there is on the 29. And these are just the little things that the designers kind of tweak from year to year that makes a more pleasurable ride. Like they get their feedback from the customers and then they go into the lab and they shave a bit of midsole here, they add a bit here, and it makes for an overall better experience. Again, I think this is one of those things that the average person, if you don't have both shoes in your hand and you're comparing them very close, I don't think is actually noticeable. I didn't notice it on the ride, but I guess it's good information to have if one of those two things are important to you. Now let's actually talk about the ride. And I will tell you that my first run out of the box in the Wave Rider 29, I went out for a 16-mile run. Now, just super easy pace, but I did put several hours in this shoe straight out of the box, and I had no problems whatsoever. It was comfortable, it was supportive. And then after that one long run, my usual runs are between 7 and 10 miles. I went out for several of those. I didn't do any speed specific workouts in the Wave Rider 29, but I did do some strides, some pickups at the end of my run just to get my legs turning over to see how they feel. And yeah, I mean, it's a daily trainer, right? It's not a speed shoe, but it does okay. And it performs exactly how I think a daily trainer should perform. It's going to take those easy miles and it's going to chew them up and spit them out very comfortably. And then when you have to pick up the pace, yeah, the shoe is capable. When I was running in the Wave Rider 29 and I was really thinking about it, I did start thinking that perhaps I could use a couple more millimeters under my forefoot because I wasn't sure if I was feeling the road through that forefoot, which I know it's silly. At 29 millimeters, there is more than enough cushioning under the forefoot, and I never had that issue with the Wave Rider 28. But that's probably a product of the midsole just being a little bit softer. But once I didn't focus on it, I can't say that there was anything wrong with the midsole foam. You know what I mean? Like when I went out for that 16-mile run, I didn't notice anything negative about the ride. Now, when I did put the Wave Rider 28 on one foot and the 29 on another foot, yeah, the softness was noticeable, but again, it wasn't like bashing me over the head. It definitely wasn't mushy, and it definitely wasn't as soft as the Neo Zen or the Neo Vista 2. So with that, yeah, I think I have to applaud Mizuno for this update because they have kept the heart and soul of the Wave Rider, and they've made some changes that have kept it up with the competition and have made a more versatile shoe. But of course, it's not that simple. If you are thinking of picking up a pair of Mizuno Wave Rider 29, you're probably looking at some of the competition. If you are thinking of the Wave Rider 29, you're probably also thinking about the Brooks Go 17. Now, the Brooks Go 17 is the same price, $150, and it has 37 in the heel, 27 in the forefoot, also for a 10mm drop, but in my size weighs in at 347 grams. So at least in my size, the Wave Rider 29 is 22 grams less than the Go 17. Next up, I think you also might be looking at the Hoka Clifton 10. Now the Clifton 10 has a little more stack height. We have 42 in the heel, 34 in the forefoot for an 8mm drop. It's the same price as the Wave Rider 29, $150. And in my size, the Clifton 10 tips the scale at 333 grams. So the Wave Rider is still 8 grams less in my size than the Clifton 10. And finally, I think you may also consider the Nike Vomero 18. Now, the Vomero 18 has quite a bit more stack. We have 46 in the heel, 36 in the forefoot for a 10mm drop. The Vomero 18 is the same price as the Wave Rider 29, but that extra stack does come with a weight penalty. And in my size, the Vomero 18 tips the scale at 384 grams. So in my size, the Wave Rider 29 is 59 grams less than the Vomero 18. That's a pretty big difference. So overall, for $150, I think the Wave Rider 29 offers a lot. I'm definitely here for the changes that Mizuno has made this year. And now that they've added 100% Energy Next to the midsole of the Wave Rider 29, I'm already curious about what we're going to see for the Wave Rider 30. Now I want to hear from you. Have you run in any of the Wave Riders over the years? Are you thinking of picking up a pair of the Wave Rider 29? Drop a comment and let me know. But for now, it's Matt B. This has been my review of Mizuno's Wave Rider 29. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.